You're listening to Deliberate Living, a podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically. My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a full-time nomad and creator who has been living in my 1997 Ford van since January 1st of 2019. I travel the United States with my dog, learning how to live with more authenticity. I explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms, finding freedom and happiness however they choose. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living podcast. I am your host, Holly Priestley, and this week we have the second half of Dave and Matt Vans, although his name comes in the first half, David Ramsay. A few weeks ago, I had Matt on the show. Now I'm going to have Dave on the show to talk about his van journey, and his also starts in New York. And he's been living out of his van for like 5.5 years, which is a crazy long amount of time. And over the last 5.5 years, he's gotten to save a ton of money, have a ton of experiences, and as I just mentioned, start a brand new van build company with Matt in Colorado. And so I'm really excited to have Dave on the show. I think his story is going to be just a different take on the van experience, and I hope you all enjoy it as well. So hello, Dave.
Hi.
For anybody who doesn't know you, doesn't know your story, doesn't know anything about pre-Dave and Matt Vans, can you give a little background about what your life was like 6 years ago before you moved into the van, and how you kind of got to where you are today?
Yeah, I'll go back further than that. I grew up in Minnesota, went to school and all that, high school there, and then went to college in the East Coast in Massachusetts. And ended up spending about 12 years on the East Coast. So I was living in New York City for about probably 7 years or so before living in the van. And that was where the van journey started.
So vanning is not really like as common on the East Coast as it is out here in the West. How did you find out about it, and what made you decide like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea, I'm just gonna move out of New York and into a van?
Yeah, that's I'll try and give you the shortened version. It's a long story that goes back to when I was like 10 years old, but when I was 10, I saw my first conversion van. So this is like the mid 90s, so it was probably like a Chevy or GMC Savannah. I forget what they build them on, but it was one of the ones that has a little plastic roof on it, and they've got a TV and armchairs in there, and I just remember seeing it for the first time and being like, "That's so cool! Like you could watch TV and sit in an armchair while you're driving, while someone else is driving."
Someone else is driving, yeah.
but so I was always just fascinated by that concept. We used to do road trips up to northern Minnesota all the time, and they're like 4 hours. Or I played hockey, so we drive around the state and do things. So it's just always, I was in the car a lot. It's always like, oh man, watch TV would be sweet. So I was used to just kind of look at, RVs and conversion vans and whatever, just as a little kid, and the classified ads and all that. And then continued to kind of look at them. I was just always interested, and, it turned into like, oh my God, you could move your life or take your home or whatever with you to wherever you want to go. Was always really interesting. Like I have ADHD, and that concept is amazing to me, right? Like you can change your scenery and change what you're doing all the time. So so then that kind of was always in the back of my mind. And then what happened in New York was I was working for a hedge fund for a while, about 5 years, actually up in Connecticut. And it was around like 28 or 29 years old. I was kind of like, I like this place, but it's big. We had like 1,500 employees. Like it's a big place, and I kind of wanted to do something more on my own. So I actually left and then worked with one of my best friends from college as well, who had started a hedge fund back in 2008 when he graduated. So still in finance, and it was mostly just him and I. So two people, and that was it. I always joke I went from the biggest hedge fund in the world to the smallest.
Sounds like it.
It was just to change things up and to kind of do something I wanted to do, arguably for the first time in my life. And that a lot of what I did was follow what my parents or teachers or whoever kind of told me to do. So this is the first time I was like, I'm going to do something that's kind of crazy. So I did that for a year. That was my first experience working remotely. So that was kind of the first leg of, the van experience, but I wasn't in a van yet. I was still living out of my house, but just getting used to like being on my own, getting used to working on my own, scheduling and all that was kind of like a baby step into it.
Especially with like ADHD, I imagine that was kind of a process to learn kind of how to like guide yourself and
schedule. It's great and it's hard at times, but the beauty of it was I no longer had specific hours, and so it was like if I want to nap from 3 to 5 but then work from midnight to 2 in the morning, like I can do that. So it did actually open up a lot more doors. And I think that's why there's a lot more stories about entrepreneurial people that have ADHD, is that your life becomes much more fluid, but it definitely was a change. I had to read a lot about how to manage that well. But it was a good middle ground of not just going all in on the van right away. Cause it hadn't really, clicked yet. I'd thought about it, but it wasn't finalized. So this was my way of just learning how to work remotely. So then a year later, I actually left and started my own hedge fund that my best friend still helps me manage, but it's actually now under my own umbrella. So now it meant I'm truly autonomous. So I am no longer working underneath someone else's company. I'm no longer, under the rules that, he laid out. So that was when I bought the van. And really what it came down to was starting my own fund was going to be, I was making like $300 a month. Like it was nothing. And so living in New York was obviously out of the question. Yeah. So, I calculated my expenses there were probably between like $2,500 and $3,500 a month just for rent, utilities, transportation, and basic cost of food. So groceries, not even like going out or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'll exhaust my savings pretty damn fast if I do that. And so I needed to figure out, what's the cheapest way to live? If I really want to do this, I need to find a really cheap way to live. And I always joke, like the two options were basically like, well, I could have gone back and lived with my parents, but I was like, I'm 30 years old. I'm done with that. The other option is I could have gone to like Topeka, Kansas and lived out of someone's basement for $300 a month.
Yeah.
Or I could finance a Class B RV, which is basically a van, for about $440 a month. So I was like, all right, that's a no-brainer. I need to be able to travel across the country to fundraise, to meet with clients. It lowers your utility bills,
housing costs.
I don't need a car anymore. So it was like, $440 versus a basement in Topeka. Like, I'm going to go ahead and get the van. So that was really what enabled. The business would not have been possible without that, because I was like, there's no way to live on $300 a month. So so that was kind of the progression of how I ended up choosing the van. It was purely financial. I shouldn't say purely. It was probably 70% financial, 30% lifestyle. At the end of the day,
that's so interesting. That's so different from any other story that I've heard or definitely had on the show. When you were starting a hedge fund and you had clients that you were meeting with or people who were, coming to work with you, were you worried about what they would think about you living in a van and not like in some fancy schmancy apartment in the city? Like, did that ever cross your mind, or like, did that even come up in conversation? Like, how did you navigate?
No. So my philosophy, I guess, in any of the businesses, and we run Dave Matt Vans very similarly, is just, I want to enable something that a lot of people don't have access to. And so all of my clients were friends or family that didn't have a ton of money. Like my minimums, and my best friend does the same. Like he and I, again, he manages the fund. It's like we're working together, but we're separate entities, if that makes sense. He and I have the same philosophy, which is let's have the lowest minimums possible. Let's find ways to get people that would never have access to this type of thing to get them access to it. And so, our minimums are like $25,000, which is a lot, but compared to like the fund that I worked for before was $100 million minimum. It's like, it's slightly different as far as who can actually use this. So that was never a concern, because the people I was talking to, I already had pre-existing relationships, or at least were like friends of friends that I knew. And so that was never a concern. And it was cool to be able to, I've got clients in Tennessee and Minnesota and, obviously New York, Connecticut, like all over the country, California. So to be able to go and actually meet with them and see them and do that, even though I'm a small, tiny one-man thing, like it's still kind of cool. So it was never that concern. It was more just, how do I truly give this a shot? Like, how do I basically not exhaust all my savings so soon that I can't actually let this play out the way that it should?
Right.
And I think that has been, as I think about like our goal with Dave Matt Bands, and what gives me the pleasure of not truly living van life for the last couple of years, because the business has grown so much, it's hard to travel, but is to see a lot of people that have been able to live a life that they've been really wanting to live, or pursue a passion that they've been dreaming about. And then all of a sudden, the biggest deterrent, which is always financial stuff, all of a sudden that problem is solved, is the most satisfying thing ever to see, of whether it's a programmer or a freelancer or just anyone who's like, hey, I want to go pursue this passion. Like, we have a professional CrossFitter that has one of our vans. And so there's so many things out there that, pursuing your passion is not always the most lucrative thing.
No.
But the threshold of what you now need when you live out of the van has changed so much that now making $30,000 a year or $20,000 a year, living out of a van, that is, you're saving money that way.
Yes.
And so seeing that has been really fulfilling. And that's sort of how the mentality has always been, which is, I want to enable people that, their financials may not be amazing. And I've seen it firsthand of, private school and all that. Like, if you have money, life is so much easier. And the more money you have, the easier it gets.
Up to like what, 75K, I think, is the limit.
That's that's the happiness limit too, which is always the funny one. But yeah, I mean, when you have, there's a comedian had a good joke about it, where it's basically like, when you have more money, people are willing to give you more money. And when you don't have money, they charge you for not having money. Like, when you think about a bank, like, you have a lot of money,
absolutely,
they'll pay you, they'll give you interest. If you don't have money, you get charged, low minimum fees and all that crap. So anyway, the goal has always been like, I want to help enable things that and give access to things that other people wouldn't normally have, whether it's the hedge fund or whether it's, hey, go be a professional CrossFitter. And I know you don't make a lot of money. And I know people would first say, like, how are you going to live off that? And it's like, go live out of a van and you can then do it. So that was always, I segued there, but that was, I don't know.
No, I think I personally love that. That makes me like really buzzy, because that's why I do everything I do, is to have a positive impact and show other people that, they're capable and they can do whatever it is that they want to do. They might have to get a little creative on how they do it. And so I think that is really special, that was kind of your goal from the get-go, even, pre-van life, like just in your previous endeavors, was to help give more opportunities where people were maybe struggling to find them otherwise. And in that process, you gave yourself a really incredible opportunity as well. And so you've gotten to live and travel and make a difference and like still live your own full, robust life. And I think that's amazing. What are some of the biggest like changes that have occurred from, you know, your first like 2 or 3 weeks in the van 5.5 years ago to, well, you're not in a van right this minute, but when you're in a van now, what do you think are some of the biggest shifts that you've had, like the biggest lessons that you've learned in that?
Yeah, it's funny. My first 2 weeks in the van sums up that question. In that when I got my Class B RV, the first trip I was doing after the starting the fund was so time intensive that I actually didn't use the van the first 4 months I had it. Like I lived out of it, but I didn't travel with it. And then I ended up, I rented it out to some people and on Outdoorsy, and it was like, it rented like 4 months straight, and then I had to go. Yeah, it was crazy. But anyway, that's another story.
That's amazing.
But yeah, so the first trip I did, the first 2 weeks in it, so I packed everything perfectly. I put all my books, I put my golf clubs, I put, you know, clothes for different types of weather, and like just really like used every nook and cranny of the van. And I had to turn around 6 days into it and go back. Because what happened was I packed it so perfectly, but as you start using things and then you start using things on a daily basis, you know, it became inefficient in my mind to like, okay, always put things back in every single exact location before. And so what happened was the RV just ended up getting like filled with crap, just out all over the place. And I'm on the bed, and I was like, oh my God, I packed way too much stuff. So I actually had to turn around and go all the way back to Minnesota from Alabama, unload half the van into a storage unit, and then hit the road again. And it was that to me summed it all up, which is it sums up so much. It sums up how we started the business. It sums up how we designed our van. Like, it's Matt's design of our first van, but the essence of it is start from nothing and build your way up, versus start from everything and pare your way back. And that's how, you know, that was my first experience. That's what our vans are, is we start with the bare essentials. You can add things after the fact. Don't go buy a $250,000 Sprinter or an RV that has a generator and a black tank, and like, you can't strip those things out after the fact. So start from nothing and then slowly add. And so that was how I learned. My philosophy was always, if I forget something, if I need something, I can always buy it. But let me kind of deprive myself of it for a few weeks and see how truly essential it is. And you find that it's not usually that essential. And if it is, okay, great. You prove it to yourself, go buy it. Like, and you know, you'll get use out of it. So that was how I started. Great experience right off the bat. And, you know, I'm not a minimalist by any means. I have a lot of stuff. I have a lot of hobbies and interests, and but it has really just focused me on what's actually important, what's actually needed, versus the things that, like, yeah, you might use once a year, but who cares?
Yeah. I mean, that little chunk of start from nothing and build up versus start from everything and pare down, that is just a nice little tweetable, a nice little quote. You can make that a bumper sticker. Like,
yeah.
That sounds awesome. What did your friends and family think of your vanning? Were they supportive or were they confused?
I think for my background, so I had a very privileged background. Both my parents are doctors, and gave me everything we'd ever asked for, my brother and myself. And you know, they grew up a certain way, and I think had a certain vision. And you know, at first it was a very weird. You know, my dad was like, "What? Are you okay? Like, what the hell's going on?
Are you okay?"
I think he was actually like visibly or actually mad by me doing it. But I also, like, you know, I've had ADHD my whole life, and I have a new idea every week for something I'm really passionate about, and then the next week it's gone. So it's like, okay, another one of those. But I was like, no, this has been since like 10 years old. Like, this is a thing that I've that has not gone away, and I've talked about it. And, you know, one of my mottos in my own personal life is I never want to be one of those people that just talks and talks and talks about what they want to do but never does it. And that was my impetus of like, fuck it. Like, I'm not going to be one of those people who talks about going and living in an RV and traveling around the country. I got to do it.
Yeah. I've
Um,
had that conversation recently, actually, how I don't want to, I don't necessarily have people in my life who like want to do things. I want to have people in my life who are doing things.
do them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I fortunately, so I have an older brother, who is also in finance, and, you know, opposite personality, very type A, very calculated, incredibly, you know, good at what he does. It's perfect for his job. But he is the most risk averse person I know. And I sat down with him, and he basically was just like, all right, if you do this, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, what's the lowest possible, you know, situation that could end up? And I was like, I get 2 weeks into it and I hate it.
Yeah.
And he was like, then what would you do? And I was like, I'd go back to the hedge fund I used to work for. You know, I would go back to what I used to be doing. And he was like, yeah, then do it. Like if that's your lowest, if that's the risk, like, you just go back to what you did before, then like, what is the risk? Like, there isn't a risk. Like, there's obviously whatever, you can get a car accident. That's not what he was getting at, but it was more just like, for your life and for your long-term, you know, success, like, what are you really giving up? And I was like, man, if you're on board with this, then this is a good idea.
Absolutely.
So he was super helpful, you know, and kind of helping be that sounding board for me. Cause again, my brain's all over the place all the time, and I have all these crazy ideas. And a lot of times he's the one who's like, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said. And I'm like, all right, thanks. So he's my barometer of like, man, if you're on board with something, I'm going to jump tomorrow.
That's good.
So yeah, so that was, you know, that was helpful. And then I think for, you know, for my dad specifically, like, it was, he just had no idea. It's so different. You know, being a doctor is a great career in that you study your whole life. You put your head down, you get your, you know, diploma, and then you have a career set forever. So there's no, I shouldn't say there's no risk, but there's a lot less risk because of the amount of sweat equity you put into what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 24 years of schooling, right? Like, to get to be a doctor from kindergarten all the way through. So it's like, yeah, you're going to have something coming out of that that's a great competitive advantage and a big barrier to entry. So like,
yeah,
it's just a different way to live your life versus, you know, this is a lot of risk involved. And obviously I lowered it by the van, and I saw that, but I think my parents didn't necessarily see it that way. And then what's been funny is the van life thing has been secretly picking up. And so when I had the van 6 years ago or so, all my dad's friends were like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to, like, you know, buy an RV and live. And my dad's like, what the hell is going on? Like, why is everyone saying that this is such a good idea? And he's like, I had no idea that this even existed. So he's really, you know, been very proud of kind of how it's progressed and what it's enabled me to do. And, you know, and I get it. Like, he's a parent and wants to protect, you know, your ability to have a good life. So I think when he saw that, he was worried, you know, what might be happening, but now, you know, made something out of it and kind of explained how it was supposed to work. So, yeah, they're super supportive. It just was very different path. So,
yeah. So now he sees that you have a good life, and he's like, all right, I don't understand it, but neat.
Yeah. Well, and now he gets it, because, you know, I've been doing it for so long, and the business, and, you know, just the traction it's been getting, and during COVID and his friends and all that, like, he's like, oh my God, I really do understand it now. But yeah, it was so different from what, you know, anything he knew. So, so that was, you know, just took a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that. I get that. What do you think are some of the biggest cons of the lifestyle? We've talked kind of about a lot of pros, a lot of glowy things, a lot of, you know, this is beneficial because, but we both know that living in the van is not always a very glamorous experience, and it definitely has some drawbacks. What were some of the biggest drawbacks for you in your life over the last 6 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just give up a lot, right? Like, you give up a lot of I hate the word creature comforts. It's one of those words that I just hate, but
but you do.
But I guess that's what the term is. I don't know. But like, the shower situation, the bathroom situation, the, cooking situation, the sleeping situation, like it's way different. I think that it's without, so my answer is almost like cliche, and I'm not trying to like speak hyperbolically on it, but there are no drawbacks in my mind, in that what it enabled me to do, I don't fucking care. I'll give up like it enabled me to live my life the way I wanted to live it. So like, what are you giving up? You're giving up like some minor inconvenience of having to go to Planet Fitness to shower. Like, sweet. Okay. That's not that big of a deal. Like, okay, I have to go to the bathroom in a composting toilet without a ton of privacy. Like, okay. It's a tiny space. Like, so it's okay. That's what I'm giving up, but I'm giving that up to go, live a life that I've always wanted to live. Like, is that really a downside? And so it really did open my eyes to like how little you truly need, especially in those types of conveniences. And like, yeah, there's annoyances, and like, I don't have an air conditioner in my van. And like, if I'm in Minnesota in the summer and it's 94 degrees and humid, like, yeah, that sucks, but just go to a coffee shop, like leverage someone else who has air conditioning. Yeah. But it's always just keeping that perspective of, for me, it's like, Dave Met Vans would not exist without me living in a van. Like the way that we started this business, it was all because of the van. Literally because we build vans, and also just like it enabled me to be flexible enough to go and, Matt built a van and I had a rental fleet in Minnesota, and, I was like, I'm going to be there next week. It's like, I cannot do that if I have an apartment and ties to a city. It's like, and then I've been there for 2 years now. Like, so yeah, like, and I'll speak about the things that are inconvenient. Yes, the shower is annoying, in that like we've got a little rinse station in mine that I technically could wash off if I was, mountain biking at night or something, or, at the end of the day and I was gross. But yeah, Planet Fitness and friends' houses and campgrounds and just not showering for a day or two, or, there's a lot of ways around that, but it is a big difference and a big change. And, I do love showering, so it's something you have to give up. The bathroom thing is unique. And did you see Nomadland?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so that was I basically lived that life for about a year or so. Having to park next to gas stations and walking there at 11 o'clock at night. I lived in a low roof Dodge B250 van or something like that.
Oh.
It was horrible. I was hunched over a lot, but that was early on. And that was when I had my rental business and I had 6 vans that I was renting out, and I would just swap between the vans, whichever one wasn't rented, and move all my stuff. And it was not glamorous. I mean, but it was also some of the most like nostalgic parts of my life of watching Nomadland. And like, I remember it's probably the time that I first truly felt free. And it's a weird story, but it was like, I remember having to walk like 5 blocks to a 7-Eleven to throw away pee bottles that I had and then use their bathroom, and there's no one out. It's 11 o'clock at night. But it's just that like, I was finally doing my own thing, and the like freedom I felt just walking as slow as I wanted to walk and not feeling any urgency or any stress or any of that. And like, some people look at that and be like, oh my God, like that's it's a horrible way to live. And I was like, yeah. I could not have been happier doing those walks. And I still remember them this day, like the feeling of just like, I could stop. There was an Indian grocery store that had food that they served there and stuff. And I didn't feel like I was in a rush. Like, living in New York, you always feel like you're in a rush. And I was like, I could stop, on my way back and just kind of walk around the grocery store and see all the different stuff that they're making and doing, and not have to buy anything, just take it in and take the long way back to it was the first time I ever felt truly free. And when I watched Nomadland, it's like, it just hit those chords of like, my dad, like my parents saw that and they were like, yeah, it's kind of depressing. And I was like, I thought it was beautiful, man. I was like, you can like see the freedom in their eyes of just like, they're doing their own thing. And like, yeah, it's a struggle, but there's nothing better.
I think that is so, I don't want to use the same word, but I think that's just really special because like, I get it. I understand like taking long walks to gas stations in the middle of the night is not my preferred form of freedom, but I can certainly understand like I don't have anywhere to be. Like you're not in the hustle and bustle of the city. Like you have time to actually let yourself slow down and enjoy whatever it is that you're trying to enjoy in that moment. And I think that's really cool. So we definitely did not come up with any cons.
Well, yeah, and I think it's that combo too. It was that not working for someone else thing of just like, for the first time in my life, like I always felt like I owed my parents a lot because they put us through school. I felt like I owed my employers a lot because they hired me and all that. So this was that first time in my life where it's like, I am doing my own thing and it could not be better. And again, it's all about perspective. And
yeah,
I talk a lot about that. Even when we hire people for what we do is like, we only build ProMasters. We do a very templatized, repeatable process to gain the efficiencies and all of that.
That's how you keep
and I always tell people exactly what, and the way I explain it to potential employees is like, there's two ways to look at this. You can look at it as you're doing a repetitive, monotonous, menial task over and over and over again. And I was like, if that's your perspective on it, you're not going to be happy with how we build bands.
Yeah.
Or you could view it as, I love thinking about if I was to build 1,000 of these, how do I make it more efficient? How do I improve the process? How do I make our templates better? And there are people that get so excited about the process.
And it's a game.
That it's exactly. And that's what I always felt van life was if you just look at it of, oh, you are living out of the van, you don't have these creature comforts, if you don't, whatever, you're viewing it tactically and very myopically, which is like, cool, it's probably not going to be a lifestyle for you. Or you could view it as every day is a new problem. Every day is trying to, solve these things, and it's helping to enable something bigger than just the day-to-day. You're going to love it. And that's what I've always viewed it as. Like, there's something way bigger than the day-to-day of the van, where like, I don't even notice the day-to-day stuff of the van because all I see is what it's created. And so, yeah, they're just two different mindsets. And some people might look at it and say like, con. All this stuff is different and it's not as convenient. And to me, I look at it being like pro, like everything has enabled the lifestyle. So like, yeah, who gives a shit about the day-to-day?
I think that's awesome. So you moved into the van because you were starting your own hedge fund. So you moved into the van basically so that you could be an entrepreneur. And it sounds like over the last few years, you've iterated and you've added a lot of things. You started with the hedge fund, and then you said you had a rental fleet. And then I know you have Dave and Matt vans now. Like it seems like it spurred like an entire plethora of entrepreneurial opportunities for you. Can you talk a little bit about that and like how you've been able to, afford this not quite as expensive as the lifestyle you were looking for lifestyle, and how you've continued to maintain that? Because I mean, I always say that van life can be as cheap or as expensive as you want it to be within reason.
Yep.
But starting your own business is scary for a lot of people, and you went ahead and just did both of them all at once.
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of flowed together correctly. So obviously I had saved a little bit of money, but I truly I used to do financial coaching for some people just on the side. And it's hard, right? Because I grew up in a privileged household. I grew up with parents that are doctors. Like, they sent me to private school, all that. So some people can look at it and be like, you're overestimating or underestimating how big of an impact that had. But I've truly broken down from the start, which is if you have okay credit, and we've done this on our own side, decent credit and, a little bit of savings, you can finance an RV, a Class B RV van, for $450 a month. So that does not, you don't need any prior private school educations or any parents that are a doctor. If you have okay credit, like 650 or above, and a little bit of savings, you can finance a van for $450 a month with no money down.
Just cheaper than rent in a lot of places except a basement in Topeka.
Exactly. But that is the baseline for truly anyone. Again, unless your credit is just god awful, no one's going to loan you money.
Yeah.
And that is a problem, but that's another story. But anyway,
really got to have a lot of buy in cash.
Yeah. So I'm trying to be reasonable and just saying, like, if you're an average person, you can start this lifestyle. And then obviously, like, you need to have an idea of what you want to do. Like, you can't just, do it and say, I'm going to go, be a ski bum. It's like, no, you have to have some sort of income and some sort of idea of how you want to make money. And nowadays there's way more opportunity than there was 6 years ago.
Oh my God. Especially
to go work remotely.
Like, there's so much remote stuff now.
Yeah. And so, that was the baseline of, all right, that's my overhead. I can basically live for, like, if I didn't move the van, so therefore didn't need to pay for gas and all that. And insurance for RVs is like insanely cheap. It was like $40 a month or something.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, so, with food, you're probably at $750 a month. So you just need to make that, right, in order to break even here.
Yeah.
So that's where it all started, was just, all right, that's where I'm starting. Therefore, I would need to make X amount and then, go from there. And so, yeah, like, there is a lot of hustle that happened the first few years of, like, so yeah, I started the hedge fund. That was a big endeavor. And obviously, like, I have a background in that, so that's easy. But, like, there are so many other ways to have a side hustle these days. I drove Uber for a little bit when I first started the hedge fund. Like, I bought I bought a different minivan. This is slightly before I bought the van. Actually, now I'm thinking about the timeline.
Okay.
But it was just like trying to find ways to make money was like, that's a way to make a few $100, and that helps. And then, you can work your way into that. So yeah, there was a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit of just like, how can I hustle to make enough to cover the expenses? And so, yeah, like the hedge fund thing, it's a few $100. I have my real estate license in Minnesota. That helped. So I'd help, one friend a year buy a place, and commission checks $10,000 or something like that. So that covers a bunch and doesn't take a lot of time. And it takes like 2 weeks to get your real estate license and $800. So again, like,
I had my real estate license in Colorado, and it took a smidge longer than 2 weeks, but.
Well, this was 2 weeks of 8 hours a day, every day for 14 days straight. But yeah, it's about 90 hours of time to do it. But again, it was just a trade-off of it's $800.
Yeah.
And, if I do one transaction, I paid for myself easily. And then I just had to hustle to find people to do that. And then the rental thing where I rented the van out for a little bit, and then, stayed in, I think I stayed in my parents' house for a month while that was rented out the first time. And then, had a cheap little side apartment that was like a room in someone's place for $400 a month. If all the vans were rented, once I started buying them, then I had that as my backup. So yeah, it was just a lot of like grinding it out and like working 7 days a week and, cleaning. I remember just cleaning all the rental vans when they started to come back. Cause I had my van when I started to build the fleet, cause the thing just kept renting, and all of a sudden I was like, shit, that's working. So let's go with that direction.
That's awesome.
And again, the van enables you to just go, right? Like wherever the opportunities are, you go. And
more flexibility.
They're probably, yeah. And like, they'll probably fail, right? Like that opportunity, great. You gave it a shot, failed. Go to the next, you just keep driving to where you need to go until you find the opportunity that starts to work. And then once it starts to work, go with it. And so the rental business was really working. And so the hedge fund almost became on the back burner, which is I just did the bare minimum to make sure I was in compliance with the federal stuff I had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew the rental fleet. And then that started to work really well. And then, the real estate license was helping to supplement a couple things. And then it was, talking to Matt randomly, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to build a van." And I was like, "Oh, how are you going to do that?" And I was like, "I want to be a part of that," because my original plan was to go build out my own rental fleet, because I'm paying $65,000 for every van.
Yeah.
You can build them for 30. It's like, yeah, that's way better. So then, he finished his van, told me how much it costs. And I was like, "I'm going to be in Vail next week, and you're going to teach me how to do this." And so like the van allowed me to go to Vail that week. And then, now I haven't left, but it just if you have that mindset of like, I want to I want to do my own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucks. And like, I talked to a lot of people about that. And again, it's where I hate that it's shaded by the my background and the privilege and all that. And it's interesting because I was adopted, so was my older brother, and I could have ended up anywhere. So it's like, it's even more of a crapshoot that I ended up in this situation, and I'm very fortunate for it. But I try and really harp on like, not a lot of that is what got me to where this is, because living that nomad land lifestyle of peeing in water bottles and eating at 7-Eleven, it's like, nothing about that is privilege. I can tell you that much. Like, I was basically homeless for a year and a half and living that exact lifestyle of like eating ramen and, peanut butter and honey sandwiches and spending, $5 a day on food. Like, I had no trust fund or bank account sitting there funding that. That was 100% just sucking it up. And again, living that lifestyle that some people might say is terrible. But I truly wanted to be on my own. So I did what I had to do. And then the opportunities started to come along that I started to put pieces together of like, oh my, there's something here now. And building the vans was that as well. And, I gave up the lifestyle really. I mean, I lived out of the van, but it was parked in a parking lot for 2 years. But the lifestyle was not the thing I was after. The van lifestyle, it was the pursuing an entrepreneurial passion and growing a business and all of that. That's what I truly loved. And so when that opportunity came, I gave it up and started enabling it for other people. So yeah, I don't know, that's where the ADHD brain's great. It's like you juggle 5 or 6 things at one time, and it's stimulating to me because I'm like, I get bored with one thing and then I jump to the next 20 minutes later. And if I just focused on one thing, it'd be hard.
Yeah. I think that's cool that the van was kind of like a means to an end. It wasn't like, I'm going to move into a van because I want to live in a van. I want that #van life. It's, I want to have this #entrepreneur life. And the van is going to help me do that. And I think that's really cool. And yeah, I like your story of, I don't want to use the word grit, because it was just more like commitment. Like, I'm committed to making this work. I'm committed to making an impact in the way that I want to. I'm committed to, doing it myself, being on my own, whatever. And then, the flexibility and the creativity that comes with figure out a way to pay for it, figure out a way to buy food today, figure out a way to keep your expenses low. And that kind of creativity, flexibility, and stick-to-itiveness will really take you pretty much anywhere in life you want to go, which is incredible.
Well, and I think on that point too, what's so cool about it is that up until recently, like before vans, there wasn't an option, right? Like, again, the only option was Topeka, Kansas in a basement, but then you're so limited into what you're going to experience, the people you're going to come across. Like, for me, like, when I'm driving, I love driving because all I do is my brain just goes, just everything I see, everything that's going on. I'm just thinking all the time. And then I'm traveling to different places and I'm meeting different people. And then they tell me something. And then, well, that reminds me of this other thing that I saw in Alabama. And you start to like connect all these things. And it's like, that lifestyle never existed. Like, and it's not just, entrepreneurial. It's more just like, it enables whatever you want to do. If it involves some sort of need to travel, some sort of need to be in different locations, some sort of need to, meet different people, like this didn't exist. Like if you had an apartment in Kansas, you're probably stuck in Kansas if you're trying to be entrepreneurial, because to fly across the country and rent a car and stay in a hotel, like that's $1,000. That's 3 months rent. And like all of a sudden it's not feasible. And that's what it is on the financial part of it too. Like to come up with a basic budget of like, what are your expenses and what's your income is actually very, very easy. And I think a lot of people get daunted by it, but it is true, which is like, if you know what your overhead is of, okay, it's gas, it's insurance, and it's the financing of the van. So that's the overhead. I already own clothes. I, have other basic things that maybe pop in there. Then it really comes down to like, all right, if you need to eat and you can only make $5 a day,
make it work.
You only have $5 to eat or you work. So it's like you're eating ramen today, or you're eating peanut butter and, sandwiches, or you're going to Costco and getting a hot dog. It's like that. It's that easy to basically say like, okay, so in order to grow this, I need to make more money. And in order to make this work, I need,
Yeah. It's figuring out your own priorities and like how you're actually going to make that a thing.
Yeah. And then, you have to commit and grind it out sometimes. Of some days I didn't eat much because I didn't have the money to do it. And it was just like, okay, it's hopefully that forces you to want to make more money and work harder and, really get out of that. And that it's not the greatest lifestyle, but it is just so unique in that and that's our pitch internally of Enable Van Life for Everyone, is really pushing on this. I don't care if it's entrepreneurial or not. Like if you want to be a pro golfer, if you want to be a pro CrossFitter, if you want to be a freelancer, like you travel nurse, like you name it. Like if you need to go around the country and do different things, this changes the game completely.
Absolutely. I feel like, the whole time we've been talking, you've been spewing wonderful pieces of advice to anybody who's listening, watching, or reading. But to sum up, like what advice would you give to somebody who is looking at your lifestyle or looking at vanning and thinking like, oh, I wish I could, but like somebody who's afraid?
Yeah. It's hard, right? Like we've talked a lot internally about like bridging the gap between dream and reality. Mm-hmm. And, Instagram is not the place to go to learn about van life. It can be inspiring in that you might get one day a year where you're at, the top of a mountain, and you can open the back doors. But I think it's, in general, my philosophy on everything is just be very, very brutally honest and straightforward with yourself and what you're like and what you want. A lot of people, I think, just delude themselves into thinking it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows, and they don't truly understand the reality of it. And we talked about it. It's the basic stuff, the showering and the sleeping, and just everything is different. Everything, it's, unless you live in New York City, which is actually a great place to start because your apartment's 250 square feet, a studio, or like you live in a closet already. It's like, it's not that much different. But yeah, I think, it's just asking the right questions and truly diving into like the downsides really. And like, I hate to, that's a little bit of my approach in life, honestly, is I call it just be realistic, which is to try and find what could go wrong. Like mm-hmm. What are the downs? Like, I'm a big believer in that, like when things are amazing, it's really easy. Like it takes care of itself, right? Like you don't have to think through the positives, and like they're great. And so really all it comes down to is like mitigating the worst case scenarios and truly asking yourself, like, what is the real downside that I'm going to experience here? And just like my brother, it was like, that was the best advice I ever got for going into van life, was just like, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah. And then
if the worst thing is going to happen, you have to sell the van and go back to what you were doing before. What's the risk, right? But it's just truly being honest with, like, it's a lot of people are unable to do it, and it's a very positive life skill to be able to look at life objectively and say, how bad is it going to be? Because again, when it's great, and that's awesome. But van life, some people can get into it, and it would not be a good situation for them, and that's just the reality. And that's not bad at all. I'm not saying it's lifestyle for everyone, but the last thing I'd want is someone to, completely give up their life, change everything, and then 2 weeks into it, be like, oh shit, this is not going to work. It's like, if you want that, rent a van. Like, we have a rental program for that reason of like, take the vans out, try it out, like
test it out first,
get used to what it's going to be like, and truly test it. Of like, don't go to the top of a mountain on a sweet camping trip. Like, go into Denver and try and live there for a few days. Like, so
I lived in Denver for like a lot of my first year in the van, because I had lived in Denver in an apartment previously. So I had that experience. Like, I was familiar with the city, at least. I knew where to hang out, but it was a completely different experience living there in a van and living there in an apartment. And there's a reason I don't go very much anymore.
Well, and to that point too, the only other advice I like to tell people about the parking situation, because that is the other con, which is like, where the hell do you park this thing? You don't have a designated spot. And I always said, so I've lived in cities. I'm not super outdoorsy, relatively speaking. So I've been in New York, I've been in Minneapolis, and San Francisco, LA, like, you name it. Like, I've been in every state, every big city. And it all, to me, boils down to respect of the situation. Of, it is not a right to be able to go park on a public street. Like, that is not something you're owed by any means, and it's illegal in a lot of cities. It actually is legal in some cities, so obviously know the rules. But if you are truly respectful of this being a privilege of yours, and like, I always tell people, like, I don't go park, in some city street and put lawn chairs out in front of people's yards and park there for 7 days straight. It's like, when I go to sleep, I find my spot at 10 p.m. I drive there at 10 p.m. and I'm out of there by 8. And like, I don't linger. I'm not obnoxious. I don't have lights on. I don't have music on. Like, it is a pure privilege to be able to do that. And I treat it as such. And again, it's another one I see where like, people just think that, Walmart parking lots, that they're owed this privilege. I'm like, they don't have to do that. Like, they don't have to do that at all. And actually,
anymore.
And it's a huge liability for them. Like, they get no upside. They're just doing it because, you might go buy some stuff from them. But like, if your, dog or kid gets hit by a car in the parking lot and dies, like, you're going to sue Walmart. Like, there is no reason they need to do that for you.
Right.
And so when I'm there, like, I treat it as such. And I am like a person that comes across in any of those situations is like, you have to be as unentitled as possible. And if you can do that and truly, treat the city with respect that you're in, I have found that in general, you will be treated, the same back. Now, I will say that I'm obviously unique in that being a white male is very different. We've got 2 ambassadors that work with us that are awesome. They've done a couple of videos and, some other stuff for us, but, it's a Black couple living out of Chicago.
Yeah.
Their stories are way different. They get the police called on them for being Black, basically, is all it is. Like, they're not doing anything different than I would have done. And they have some videos of that. And so, like, obviously all I can speak of is from my perspective, but, they've obviously also lived in Chicago for years out of a van and have made it work. And so it's definitely possible. And I think their mentality is the same, which is just, all you can do is do your best to respect the situation and not take it for granted. And again, not feel like you're entitled to anything, because it is, those city streets are paid for by all the people around you paying taxes. Pay for those streets. And so like, you've done nothing to have them. So that mentality has worked very well for me, and has allowed me to be comfortable in Denver, be comfortable in New York City. And it takes a little bit of effort to figure those things out, but
it's a learning process.
Yeah. And again, it's just coming into it of, you know, it's different than your house where you own that house and you own that land and you pay taxes to the government for it and all of that. Like that, yeah, that's your sanctuary right there. It's like when you're in the van, there's no land underneath you that you own, unless you do own land somewhere and go do whatever you want there. But yeah, that is a unique part. And again, another con in that category. It's just that can sometimes be difficult, but you know, again, it's all relative.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this whole hour you've just been spewing a lot of wonderful like anecdotes and pieces of advice, good stories, truthful, honest stories, and that's amazing. Where can people come find you online if they want to know more about your story specifically, and also Dave and Matt Vans?
For me, nowhere.
Nowhere. You're not online at all.
I have an Instagram profile, but I think I've put one update in the last 2 years or something like that. And I don't do anything on Facebook. I don't know. I'm 35. I guess I'm too old for social media at this point.
That's not true.
No, I know. I just don't use it. Too busy with other stuff. But no, the business has a lot. Matt does pretty incredible work with all that. And that's, you know, our website's dmbands.com, Instagram's Dave Matt Bands, and we've got YouTube and Facebook, and I think we even have TikTok now. So we're really,
all right,
really getting hip. But yeah, no, the marketing team we use and Matt runs all that, has a lot of information. And yeah, we try and be as honest as possible with everyone about it. Again, our goal is enable van life for everyone and bridge the gap. And so we've got blog posts and all that stuff that's very just candid around, like, you know, what you don't need in vans. And like our sales process is very similar to that. Just Ted, our sales guy, will tell you all the time, you don't need this in your van. Like, don't put it in there. And even like options that we offer, like, so we could make more money, and he will sit there and say, like, you do not need this. I'm not going to sell it to you.
Yeah. If you want to add it later, but we're not doing that.
Yeah. Most of his conversations are taking people's quotes that they put together on our website. Like, we have a van builder application where you can like literally see the price of every add-on and how it changes the van price and all that.
Yeah.
I think most of Ted's job is just getting people to pare down their quote to actually what they need. I don't know many quotes that have come through that Ted has added anything to it. I think it's always like, you're not going to need this, you're not going to need that, you're not going to need this.
That would be
so that's our whole MO is yeah, just make it affordable and make it accessible, and hopefully enable people to do some pretty cool stuff.
That's awesome. I love it. And I'm really grateful to have had both of you guys on the show. And then we'll have another episode in a couple of weeks with both of you talking specifically about your business, where it started, how it's going now, how we got here, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you to everybody who is watching, listening, or reading about this episode. As always, this is an audience-supported podcast, so if you want to help offset some of the costs that go into producing the show each and every week, I have a Venmo and a PayPal linked in the show notes. And I also have a Patreon if you want more behind-the-scenes action or even some snail mail in your own mailbox once a month. So please go ahead and join those. Like, subscribe, 5 stars, thumbs up, all the things, because that helps the algorithms see us and put us in front of more eyes of people who need to hear these stories, people who are looking for this kind of information, who maybe want to make the leap into some kind of deliberately alternative lifestyle. And absolutely, thank you so much, Dave, for being a part of this. I know that your schedule is like pretty cray, and getting both of us on a call is not always the easiest thing to do. But I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And I hope you guys all tune in next week for another excellent episode. Bye. We've reached the end of this episode of Deliberate Living. You can find the show notes and everything we referenced over on my website at www.hollycpriestley.com. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or on YouTube, where I also publish weekly vlogs and other informative videos. You can come join my Patreon community and get behind the scenes and bonus content, as well as postcards, stickers, and whatever else I choose to create. I'll see you next week on Deliberate Living, and until next time, keep your life on the